Let me start with saying that a few things are wrong with this presentation. One thing is that I don't have hair. The next thing is I don't have a beard. And the third thing is I'm wearing shoes. So to put it differently, Liam Quinn should be here and give this presentation. Unfortunately, he can't. He knew that I would be here at XMLPrague, and he asked me to make this presentation. I'm very happy to do it, but I hope next time, Liam, make sure you can come. Additional input on the setup of this presentation. I'm going to tell you about work from the digital publishing interest group in W3C, which is driven by Liam and Ivan Herman in W3C, and from the IDPF side, Markus Geiling. So I'm mostly here to gather your feedback and to convey that to them, but maybe in the discussion there will be some questions. This presentation is based on presentation Markus and Ivan created, which gives much more detail. It would have been far too long to give here. And also, it's based on input Liam provided in previous conferences. So this is it. I'm here to give you a short summary of what this is about, EPUB-WEB, and I'm looking forward to your feedback. So why do we need EPUB-WEB? The vision, the high-level vision behind is that people want portable documents as native citizens of the open web platform. And that the separation between documents offline and on the web goes away. What does that mean? That you're able to use offline content online the same way you use offline, that you're able to save online content offline, and it has consequences for the users. So that you are able as a user to change between offline and online mode, to change between devices, and also for the publisher, that you create the content just once and republish it on the web or for offline modes. You can give the background motivation for EPUB-WEB also from the two communities, the EPUB community and the web platform community. And EPUB-3 gets more and more adoption by the publishers, but it's not enough. The rendering engines you have in ebook readers, they don't implement EPUB-3 yet. And if you want to use it in the browser, you can only use it for browser extensions. So there's some development then on top of browser core needed, and it's so-called not satisfactory. From the web platform perspective, embracing ePlat, bringing this close to the open web platform as much as possible. If you look in the technical areas, which we will do in a second, makes a lot of sense, because what is needed in terms of technical development for bringing EPUB portable documents as native citizens to the web, that's the same you would need for web content anyway. Things like packaging, like dealing with metadata, what we heard in the two presentations and the three presentations this morning on semantics, and also with regards to offline support. So also from these perspectives, it sounds like a natural development to bring EPUB and the open platform together and to kind of merge the future development of both. So what use cases would you have for EPUB-WEB? Simplest one is the book in the browser, so that you're able not only in your ebook reader, but also in the browser to work with your EPUB content without further extensions, that you're able to follow links from the EPUB content to the book, that you're able to create bookmarks in book pages right in the browser, share them with others across devices or within the web, and read also large books on many devices. Then another use case is scholarly publishing. For scholars, it's important to adapt formats to many reading environments. So let's say you have, as a teacher, you're having your tablet to review a text a student has written. You want to convey these remarks to the student also on his or her device. So for that, adaptation of a format is very important. Again, offline usage is important. If you have made these remarks online, you need to be able to provide them to others offline. And providing multimedia or data or software. In scholarship publishing, it's more and more important to have information beyond the content. For example, the data sets used in experimentations directly link multimedia content as well. So these are use cases from the scholarship publishing perspective. When in-house publishing, an area which, of course, for many of you is important here, where you are delivering the technology for this. It's important then for you to deliver, it would be an important use case for you to deliver online and offline the same content without the need to have separate conversions between the two, but just have one file or maybe one set of file for both scenarios. When taking the perspective of archival storage and preservation, of course you can archive complete web pages, but when being able to produce the same version and render it in the same version, same for both EPUB content and web content, that would be another use case for bringing both together. And then educational material. And here is an area where kind of the question, what is really content like book content and what is an interactive web application becomes more and more blurred. So you have educational pages on the web which have question answering facilities with, again, multimedia content and much more, also multimedia including interaction. So here again, bringing the development of EPUB and the web platform together would make a lot of sense. So now taking another high-level look what communities would be affected by this development. First, large trade publishers who, of course, would then change their publishing workflows so that they would have just one content format, both for offline and online usage. Browser vendors, as I said, current status that if you want to use EPUB on the web, you would need extensions, but having EPUB-WEB natively supported would mean that the browser core would adopt that. When governmental bodies who are often required to publish portable documents. Currently, they publish a lot of PDF, there's some EPUB, but enabling them to publish just in one format would be quite useful. Then, of course, consumers of ebooks with one format to be used both offline and online and across devices. It would be easier for them to share the content, to share annotations, metadata on the content. We'll come to that in a second, and so on. When web designers, currently it's a quite different job to design a web page versus to design the layout of a digital publication. So that's something which may change in the future. When web developers, again taking the educational example, where in the future it might mean no difference to create an educational application or to create an EPUB document, EPUB-WEB document. Then STM publishers who can benefit a lot from links to, like I said, data sets and other information, again, to be used across devices. Large companies who have a lot of in-house publishing, which could be streamlined if this development goes further. Then international institutions, here I'd like to point out that for many of these, I won't name in here, but we have some content where really the multilingual aspect of publishing, of high-level quality publishing, is very important. So that you're able to put high-level typography, taking the requirements of various typographic traditions into account, to bring that onto the web. When scholarly authors, again, for them, having the collaborative means to work on content is very important. Archivists, which I had mentioned before, and developers of publishing workflows, like I'm sure many you are involved. So let's now come to the technical steps which are needed to achieve these goals. I mentioned several times already the archival aspect, so there needs to be common packaging format which allows you to work with the content both online and offline. There have been packaging formats developments on the web. Of course, EPUB itself already provides such a format. It's an XML structure, but not enough anything which is now natively supported in the browser. So some discussions around this area are, well, for packaging, should we use JSON instead? It's just a discussion point, so something which you may give feedback on. Another discussion which is going on is to say, would it be sufficient to say we don't have separate files, but we have just one HTML file with a default structure, with default CSS for web pages, which have a purpose to be used also in an offline mode as electronic publications. So that were some technical items related to packaging. Now we go to the area of identification and metadata. So identification is, in the publishing world, of course, a very important topic. It's very important to have unique identifiers for the work, or, well, you might say the digital book. As a matter of fact, the way you identify items in the publishing world is quite different when identifying items on the web. On the web, well, the URI is the basic means to identify resources uniquely on the web. In the publishing world, you have many different identifier schemes. So if you really want to have interoperability, including reading devices, including archivists, including the browsers, there needs to be some understanding of what identifier schemes play what role in these devices. And that has a lot to do with these communities really working closely together, like libraries, publishers, and the web community at large. Then another aspect of identification are fragment identifiers. That is identifiers not to target the whole book, the whole content, but just a selected piece of content. So that again relates to the presentations this morning, where you say you embed some metadata, some semantic metadata in pieces of the content. So the selection of a metadata, including this context of a metadata, that's still something where the full-fledged technical mechanism is missing. So there's a dedicated group, the W3C annotation working group, which is creating a model. That group has emerged out of a community group. So they started a few months ago, but they have already published the first draft because of this work done before in the community group. And they're providing an annotation model, linked data, RDF-based annotation model, and also ways to anchor that model in web content. Not restricted to that. There may be other types of content you annotate, but that would be one solution to this fragment identifier problem. When there's the handling of metadata, as we saw again this morning in EPUB 3.1, there's also already some support of RDFA and microdata. We also heard that it's important to be clear how do microdata, RDFA, and JSON-LD interrelate, and how to work with external metadata. And building a bridge to this fragment identifier topic, how to attach metadata to the fragments to, well, enrich the content properly. Then completely different area, styling. So of course, when you want to use the same content for high-quality publishing on the web, you need high-quality typesetting. And here, the Digital Publishing Interest Group has gathered requirements about Latin text layout and pagination. But as I said before, for example, international organizations and communities in many regions around the world have many requirements in this area. And you see here, linked from the slide, here's a summary about how to improve text layout and typography on the web and in ebooks. And if you follow this link, you will see a lot of detailed requirements, including the Latin aspect, but also many other communities, taking, for example, Japanese, Chinese, Arabic, and many other communities into account. You'll see the importance of this international aspect First, that, as I mentioned before, that international organizations are also very, very interested in this because we're just required also to publish in many languages. And that already of this description here of these international requirements, a Chinese version has been created to show the community, the Chinese-speaking community, what's being discussed here. And then finally, there are aspects like pagination, numbering, or indexing. When I discussed with some of you in the break, this already got some feedback. Well, putting EPUB content on the web, using it in a browser, I mean, I need in a book the notion of a page. Normally, you don't have that in a browser. But if you want to reuse the content, also for printing, how to work with this notion. And that relates to pagination, to page breaks, to numbering, to indexing. So where to put it, in CSS, in the DOM, or and so on. And that also relates to linking between regions and the content and robust reference handling, and then again to the fragment identifiers that I had mentioned before. Then another item which needs to be resolved to have really huge uptake of EPUB-WEB, security and privacy. Currently, of course, you're aware that ebook readers have various DRM mechanisms, and here's some consensus needed. How to resolve DRM in the browser so that it really gets a broad consensus also around different browsers. Should be strict DRM, watermarking, so-called social DRM, and so on. And then finally, presentation control. So here there are various traditions. In an ebook reader, the user can switch fonts and so on. In a browser, it's normally the web developer who decides this and who deploys the style sheets. So a different way of allowing the user to interact with the content is needed to have convergence here. So these were some challenges, technical challenges that are currently being discussed here. What's the state of this? Well, this is an ongoing effort. You see in some areas there are already working groups which are tackling these technical aspects, like the annotation group, for example, which may provide a fragment identifier mechanism. And you see linked here a more detailed white paper. Again, the presentation I mentioned at the beginning also gives more detail than this presentation here. And a list of issues, which are being discussed to move EPUB-WEB forward. And I'm happy now to take feedback here. If you want to take feedback offline, please feel free to contact Ivan and Markus. And with that, thank you very much.
Time for questions, so over there, and then like a second.
You have been talking about typography, styling, and so on. There are other W3 working groups working on CSS page media. There's a working group on CSS page floats. Is there some overlap, or doing different things because the problems are basically the same for print and online?
It's very good that you're mentioning that. If we just see the topics, it may look like an overlap. It's rather like different roles. So I myself participated in gathering requirements for Japanese quite extensively, which are also linked here from this international text layout page. In that phase, we, and also that's the role of other requirements gathering exercises here, we did not specify the technology. Also, very often, the experts in these layout traditions are not experts in language in CSS or in XSLFO. We're not experts in the layout web technology. So it's really about these requirements exercise, about gathering them. The standardization then rather happens in the groups you are mentioning.
Okay, then there is another question from Lech.
So do you think the scope to revisit some of the major design decisions to just make it work in a browser, in a vanilla browser, You already mentioned some points like moving from XML file to maybe some other sort of manifest. I think if you got rid of the zip requirement, you could just render this in a browser without any additional extensions, which could drive the adoption rate maybe.
So, so what you're saying, you're basically saying, so one should provide such a default structure without a zip package. So just saying for.
I think so, because if you serve it on the web, it can be gzip by the server or whatever. It can, if also, because you also mentioned this other thing, which is the semantics. And if you're doing the semantic tagging, unless it can be indexed and somehow searchable, it almost doesn't make sense, because then you output it to a hidden zip file. So it's kind of hard to extract the semantic information from it. So I'm thinking maybe EPUB-4 or something could revisit some of those decisions so it actually works in a browser without any extras, just like a regular web page.
Yeah, I think I understand where you're coming from. The semantics aspects in zip files is a good point as well. What I have to emphasize, the idea is really to be able to work with large books as well in the browser. Even although browsers are getting more and more powerful, if you think about scenarios like loading that content on a mobile device, size may still be an issue. So packaging,
yeah, if you're serving this over the server, that's going to be zipped up anyway. So it shouldn't really matter. And even low devices, they have gigs of memory anyway, and stream videos. So I think maybe at the time it was the right decision. I think maybe nowadays it actually. The main issue I have is not, it's a good idea to zip it up, it's just, it actually means that the adoption rate of EPUB 3 or 3.1 is not going to be huge, because you need that extension. The major book readers like iBooks or Kindle, they don't really want to get involved for whatever reason. So the adoption is not great, and by providing standard HTML that anyone can read on a browser would drive the adoption rate greatly, right?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, then there's a question from Murray.
So, Murray Maloney, I just want to observe that the current packaging format for EPUB accommodates the possibility of multiple manifestations of a given work.
Yeah.
So, if I've got a copy of this book that I was discussing earlier today, we can produce currently thousands of different manifestations of this book, whether they be specific multivalent versions, or whether they be a PDF of those versus an EPUB of those. I can package those all together. And depending on which one I need to use at this moment, I can pick the one that I want to use. So the suggestion I just heard, yeah, that's great. You can send out an HTML manifestation of this work, but that's not the work. Right? I need to be able to distinguish between the work itself and various manifestations of that.
Yes.
One of the issues that arises out of that is consistent use of IDs. Okay? Now, with respect to formatting, I just want to share a thought, okay? Just as somebody who has been writing books for more than half of my life, it doesn't matter what font it is, honestly. There's a lot of authors who, well, how do I say this and not offend anybody? There are a lot of people who create content who aren't primarily authors, they're primarily artists, okay? And so they create books that use a lot of typographic devices, and they're pretty, and I've got nothing against them doing that, but I don't know that I call it a requirement to have a large cap at the beginning of the first paragraph of a chapter. It's not a requirement, that's a nice to have. And I wonder whether a lot of the so-called requirements for styling are really requirements or just prettifying. And do we need to slow down the whole process of making all this work in order to make things pretty, when what I think the globe, the people on Earth really need, is really a way to access content and to be able to talk about that content, to be able to annotate that content and share their annotations. There's a lot of that kind of thing that's way more important than what particular font do you want this paragraph to be in and whether you want a large cap at the beginning of it.
Well, First point, I would agree. The second point on requirements, I would disagree from my experience I had with the Japanese publishing community. They say if these requirements are not on the web, the Japanese reader will not buy our books because we are used to, for example, vertical reading style. It's not related to layout, but to when a column break. Let's say if the dot is at the beginning of a column, it's really hard to read then. So again, this is not related to font, but it's still it's a layout requirement. And at the end, the message we got there from that market perspective, not the only one, but a big publishing market, is that that's really a showstopper before the publishers will agree to move towards the web. And it's really also a change of the industry, that in the past they say that's okay to just have for printing. They say that has to be resolved before making that step.
So can I comment on that?
Yeah.
I just want to say that I really don't care about the publishers. I mean, I want them to be able to publish, but they lower the bar. Okay? There are people, authors and other creators of content, whose view of what they're trying to do is an intellectual process, and they're trying to get their information to a reader. Yeah. From the perspective of most publishers, there's some stuff that they want to sell. And they have some views on, if they make it pretty and put a nice picture on the cover, it's going to sell more. That really doesn't have any effect on, individual authors. And the web's supposed to democratize content. So I'm a little concerned. I mean, I understand that the big publishers pay a lot of dues into W3C, and that means a lot to W3C, but authors like me don't care about the publishers. We want to be able to do our thing and get our book out.
Well, it's interesting that you mentioned this aspect of members in W3C. These publishers in Japan, they were not members. I mean, we managed to get their feedback. You could say from a W3C perspective, unfortunately, they didn't join then, or many didn't join then. But what they conveyed, at least in their voice, is that their users, their buyers, wouldn't adopt it. So the person you are talking about would not adopt it then. Of course, you could say, well, that's bad luck for them, when somebody else will produce the content, and then the users will just use it. But at least my impression from that discussion was that for these layout communities, it is really a showstopper, both for the user and the publisher. And in the future, maybe the publisher may not be the companies who are publishing now, maybe different companies, but my impression was that these are issues that would need to be resolved before that's being adopted.
Thank you. Thank you again, Felix.